The sack of grain hit the ground with a dull thud that seemed to echo through Martha Walker's very soul. She stood there in the bitter mountain wind, her thin dress offering no protection against the cold that cut through her like a blade, watching as her father counted the meager payment with hands that shook from more than just the chill. 10 pounds of grain, that was what she was worth to him. 10 pounds of grain to feed a family that had never truly wanted her. The mountain man who had made the trade stood silent beside his horse, his weathered face unreadable beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Gregory Edwards was his name, though she had heard it spoken only in whispers by the townspeople who feared and avoided him. They called him a savage, a man who had turned his back on civilization to live alone in the wilderness like some kind of beast. Looking at him now, Martha could see why they might think so. His clothes were rough leather and homespun wool, his beard was long and unkempt, and his eyes held the hard gleam of someone who had seen too much of life's cruelties. But those same eyes, she noticed, never once looked at her with the hunger or cruelty she had expected. Instead, there was something else there, something that made her wonder if perhaps the townspeople had been wrong about Gregory Edwards. Perhaps they had been wrong about many things. The wind picked up, sending dust and debris swirling around the small group gathered in the valley between the mountains. Martha's father, William Torres, finished counting the grain and nodded curtly to Gregory. There were no words of farewell, no last embrace, no acknowledgement that he was trading away his own flesh and blood. He simply turned and walked back toward the ramshackle cabin that had been Martha's prison for the past 18 years, leaving her standing there like a piece of unwanted baggage. Gregory watched William disappear into the cabin, then turned his attention to Martha. She braced herself for whatever was to come, expecting rough hands and harsh words, but instead he simply nodded toward his horse and said in a voice as rough as mountain stone, "We have a long ride ahead of us. Can you manage it?" The question surprised her. She had expected orders, not consideration. "I can manage," she replied, though her voice came out smaller than she had intended. He studied her for a moment longer, then walked over to his horse and began adjusting the saddle. Martha stood where she was, uncertain what was expected of her, until Gregory looked back and gestured for her to approach. When she did, he helped her up onto the horse behind him with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size and roughness. As they rode away from the only home she had ever known, Martha found herself wondering what kind of life awaited her in the mountains with this strange, silent man. The stories she had heard painted him as little better than an animal, but his actions so far suggested otherwise. There was a careful restraint in how he moved, a thoughtfulness that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The trail they followed wound higher into the mountains, growing narrower and more treacherous with each mile. Martha had never been this far from the valley, and the vast wilderness that stretched out around them was both beautiful and terrifying. Towering pines reached toward a sky that seemed impossibly blue, while far below them a river rushed through the canyon, its voice a constant whisper that spoke of ancient secrets and untold stories. Gregory rode with the easy confidence of someone who had traveled these paths countless times before. He seemed to know every twist and turn, every loose stone that might send them tumbling into the abyss. Martha clung to him as they navigated particularly dangerous sections, feeling the solid strength of his back against her chest and finding an unexpected comfort in that contact. They rode in silence for hours, stopping only occasionally to rest the horse and allow Martha to stretch her legs. During these brief respites, Gregory would check their surroundings with the wariness of a man who knew that danger could come from any direction. He spoke little, offering only brief warnings about loose rocks or steep drops, but Martha began to sense that his silence was not born of cruelty or indifference. Rather, it seemed to be his natural state, as much a part of him as his weathered hands or his penetrating gaze. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they finally reached their destination. Gregory's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, and Martha was surprised to see how well maintained it was. She had expected something crude and primitive, but this was clearly the home of a man who took pride in his craftsmanship. The logs were carefully fitted and chinked. The roof was solid and well thatched, and smoke rose from the stone chimney in a steady, welcoming stream. Gregory dismounted and helped Martha down, then led his horse to a small stable that sat behind the cabin. She stood in the clearing, uncertain what to do with herself, until he emerged from the stable and gestured toward the cabin door. "You must be hungry," he said, and again Martha was struck by the consideration in his voice. "There's stew on the fire." The interior of the cabin was as surprising as its exterior had been. Where Martha had expected squalor, she found cleanliness and order. The main room was dominated by a large stone fireplace where a pot of stew simmered over the flame, filling the air with rich, savory aromas that made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. Simple but well-made furniture filled the space, a sturdy table and chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies, and a comfortable-looking bed tucked into one corner. Gregory ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and set them on the table, then gestured for Martha to sit. She did so hesitantly, still not quite believing that she was being treated as a guest rather than property. The stew was delicious, rich with meat and vegetables, and Martha found herself eating with an appetite she had not felt in months. At her father's table, meals had been meager affairs, more about survival than satisfaction. "Thank you," she said when she had finished, and Gregory nodded in acknowledgement. "You'll sleep there," he said, indicating the bed in the corner. "I'll take the floor." Martha stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand." "What don't you understand?" "Why you're being kind to me." "My father said—" She trailed off, not sure how to voice the fears that had plagued her during the long ride up the mountain. Gregory was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was even rougher than usual. "Your father said many things, I imagine, most of them untrue." "Then why did you make the trade? Why did you want me?" He looked at her then, and Martha saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was not desire or possession, but something deeper and more complex. Something that spoke of loneliness and loss and a desperate need for human connection. "I didn't want you," he said quietly. "I wanted to save you." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Martha felt tears prick at her eyes, though she was not sure if they were born of relief or sorrow, or some combination of the two. "Save me from what?" "From him, from that life, from what you were becoming." Martha knew what he meant. She had felt herself shrinking over the years, growing smaller and more invisible with each passing day. Her father's indifference and her stepmother's cruelty had worn her down like water wearing away stone, until she had begun to wonder if she was worth anything at all. "How did you know?" she asked. Gregory was quiet again, his gaze returning to the fire. "I know what it's like to be unwanted," he said finally, "to be treated like a burden instead of a blessing." There was pain in his voice, old and deep, and Martha understood that she was not the only one who had been damaged by the cruelties of family. She wanted to ask him more, to understand what had driven him to this lonely existence in the mountains. But something in his posture warned her that he had shared as much as he was willing to share for one night. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you," and meant it with every fiber of her being. Gregory nodded and rose from his chair. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." Martha settled into the bed, which was more comfortable than any she had ever known, and watched as Gregory spread blankets on the floor near the fireplace. She wanted to protest, to insist that she could sleep on the floor instead, but she sensed that his gesture was about more than mere politeness. It was about respect, about treating her as someone worthy of consideration, and she did not want to diminish that gift by refusing it. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of wolves, Martha found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been William Torres' unwanted daughter, a burden to be disposed of at the first opportunity. Tonight she was something else entirely, though she was not yet sure what that might be. Gregory Edwards was not the monster the townspeople had painted him to be. He was something far more complex and intriguing, a man who had chosen solitude but was capable of great kindness. She found herself wondering what had driven him to this isolated existence, what wounds he carried that had never properly healed. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the ground like a blanket of tiny diamonds. Martha woke to find Gregory already up and moving about the cabin, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to solitude, but she noticed that he had set out plates and cups for two. "Good morning," she said, and he nodded in response. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," she admitted, and saw something that might have been satisfaction flicker across his features. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, and Martha found herself studying her unlikely savior in the morning light. He was older than she had first thought, perhaps in his 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. His hands were scarred and calloused from hard work, but they moved with surprising grace as he handled his cup and utensils. "What happens now?" she asked when they had finished eating. Gregory leaned back in his chair and regarded her thoughtfully. "That depends on what you want to happen." "I don't understand." "You're not my property, Martha. You're not anyone's property. What your father did was wrong, and I won't compound that wrong by treating you as something I own." The use of her name startled her. She could not remember the last time her father had spoken it, and hearing it from Gregory's lips felt like a small miracle. "Then why did you pay for me?" "Because it was the only way to get you away from him, because sometimes you have to work within an unjust system to achieve a just result." Martha felt her eyes fill with tears again. No one had ever spoken to her this way before, as if her thoughts and feelings mattered, as if she were a person worthy of consideration and respect. "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "You can stay here as long as you like. There's plenty of work to be done, and I could use the help. But you would stay as my partner, not my property. We would share the work and the rewards equally." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Martha could hardly believe she had heard it correctly. "You would do that? For me?" "I would do that with you," Gregory corrected gently. "There's a difference." Over the following days, Martha began to understand what Gregory meant by partnership. He did not order her about or expect her to wait on him hand and foot. Instead, he showed her how to tend the small garden behind the cabin, how to preserve meat and vegetables for the long winter ahead, how to repair tools and mend clothes. He taught her to shoot his rifle, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a target at 50 paces. "A woman alone in the mountains needs to know how to protect herself," he explained when she asked why the lessons were necessary. "I won't always be here to do it for you." The words sent a chill through Martha that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Are you planning to leave?" Gregory paused in his cleaning of the rifle and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Not planning to, no, but life in the mountains is uncertain. Accidents happen. Illness strikes. A wise person prepares for all possibilities." Martha nodded, understanding the practical wisdom in his words, but she found herself hoping fervently that no such preparations would ever be necessary. In the short time she had been at the cabin, she had begun to feel something she had never experienced before, a sense of belonging, of being valued and needed. Gregory was a good teacher, patient and thorough, and Martha proved to be a quick student. She had always been intelligent, though her father had never shown any interest in cultivating her mind, and she found herself hungry for the knowledge Gregory was willing to share. He had an extensive collection of books, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire while he read aloud or she practiced reading to herself. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked one evening after he had finished reading from a volume of poetry. "Here and there," he replied, which she was beginning to recognize as his standard response when she asked about his past. "Books are good company when you live alone." "Were you always alone?" Gregory was quiet for so long that Martha began to think he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Not always. Once I had a family, a wife and a daughter." The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She had not expected this, had not imagined that Gregory's solitude might be born of loss rather than choice. "What happened to them?" "Fever took them both one winter. I was away, hunting, trying to provide for them. When I came back," he trailed off, staring into the fire with eyes that held years of pain and regret. Martha felt her heart break for him. She understood now why he had been so kind to her, why he had been willing to pay her father's price to free her from a life of misery. He knew what it was like to lose everything that mattered. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Gregory nodded, acknowledging her sympathy without words. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, until he finally spoke again. That's why I came here, to the mountains. I couldn't bear to stay in the place where we had been happy together. How long ago was that? 5 years. 5 years of talking to myself and the trees in the wind. Martha felt tears prick at her eyes. 5 years of solitude, 5 years of carrying that pain alone. No wonder the townspeople thought him strange. No wonder he had retreated from the world. It must have been very lonely, she said softly. It was, until now. The simple words carried a weight that made Martha's breath catch. She looked at Gregory and saw that he was watching her with an expression of such tenderness and that it made her heart race. I'm glad I'm here, she said, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything in her life. So am I. The days passed in a rhythm of work and learning and quiet companionship. Martha found herself growing stronger, both physically and mentally, under Gregory's patient tutelage. The mountain air filled her lungs and brought color to her cheeks, while the good food and regular meals put flesh on her bones. But more than that, the kindness and respect Gregory showed her began to heal wounds she had not even realized she carried. For the first time in her life, Martha felt valued. Gregory listened when she spoke, considered her opinions, and treated her contributions to their shared life as important and meaningful. When she suggested improvements to the garden layout, he implemented them. When she found more efficient ways to preserve their food stores, he praised her ingenuity. When she made mistakes, he corrected them gently and without condemnation. It was a revelation to discover that she was capable of so much more than she had ever imagined. Under her father's roof, she had been made to feel stupid and worthless, good for nothing but the most menial tasks. Here, with Gregory, she discovered that she had a mind for planning and organization, that she could learn complex skills quickly, that she had ideas worth hearing. The transformation was not lost on Gregory. Martha caught him watching her, sometimes with an expression of wonder, as if he could hardly believe the change in her. She had arrived at his cabin a broken, frightened girl, and she was becoming something entirely different under his care. You're blooming, he told her one evening as they worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree. Like a flower that was kept in the dark, finally brought into the sunlight. The comparison made Martha blush, but she could not deny its accuracy. She felt as if she were discovering herself for the first time, learning who she truly was when she was not constantly being told she was worthless. It's because of you, she said. Because of how you treat me. Gregory shook his head. It's because of who you are. I just gave you the space to be yourself. But Martha knew it was more than that. Gregory had not merely given her space. He had given her safety, respect, and something she had never dared to hope for. Love. Not the romantic love of fairy tales, but something deeper and more sustaining. The love of someone who saw her true worth and cherished it. As autumn deepened and the first snows began to dust the mountain peaks, Martha found herself dreading the approach of winter. Not because she feared the cold or the isolation, but because she was afraid that when spring came, Gregory might decide that their arrangement had run its course. She had no legal claim on him, no right to expect that he would want her to stay indefinitely. The fear gnawed at her, making her anxious and uncertain in ways she had not been since her first days at the cabin. Gregory noticed the change in her mood, though he did not immediately understand its cause. What's troubling you, he asked one evening as they sat by the fire, she with mending in her lap and he with a book. Martha hesitated, not sure how to voice her fears without seeming presumptuous or needy. Winter's coming, she said finally. It is. Are you worried about the cold, the isolation? No, I'm worried about spring. Gregory set down his book and looked at her with confusion. Spring? Why would spring worry you? Because that's when you might decide you don't need me anymore, when you might want to go back to being alone. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with all of Martha's unspoken fears and insecurities. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Martha felt her heart sink. She had revealed too much, shown too clearly how much she needed him, how desperately she wanted to stay. But then Gregory set aside his book entirely and leaned forward in his chair, his eyes intense and serious. Martha, he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. Do you really think I would send you away? I don't know, she whispered. I have no right to expect anything from you. You saved me from my father, gave me a place to stay, taught me so much. I have no claim on you beyond that. Gregory was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his words were carefully chosen. When I lost my wife and daughter, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never again care about another human being the way I had cared about them. I came to these mountains to die, really. Not quickly, but slowly, letting the loneliness and the grief consume me until there was nothing left. Martha felt tears prick at her eyes, understanding the depth of pain he was revealing. But then you came, he continued, and you brought something back to life in me that I thought was dead forever. You brought purpose and joy and hope. You brought laughter to a cabin that had known only silence for 5 years. Gregory, she whispered, but he held up a hand to stop her. Let me finish. What I'm trying to say is that you're not the only one who's afraid of being alone again. You're not the only one who dreads the thought of this ending. If you want to stay, if you're happy here, then this is your home for as long as you want it to be. The relief that flooded through Martha was so intense it left her dizzy. She had been so afraid of being unwanted, of being cast aside once again, that she had not dared to hope for such a declaration. I do want to stay, she said, her voice thick with emotion. More than I've ever wanted anything. Gregory smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face and made him look years younger. Then it settled. This is your home, Martha. Our home. The word our sent a warm glow through Martha's chest. She had never had an our before, never been part of something that belonged to her as much as she belonged to it. Winter came early that year, blanketing the mountains in snow by the middle of November. But Martha found that she loved the enforced intimacy of the small cabin, the way the cold weather drew her and Gregory closer together around the fire. They spent long evenings talking, reading, playing chess on a set Gregory had carved himself. He told her stories of his travels before he had settled in the mountains, and she shared memories of her childhood, carefully editing out the worst of her father's cruelties. As the weeks passed, Martha began to notice subtle changes in their relationship. Gregory's touches lingered longer when he helped her with tasks, and she caught him watching her with an expression that was warmer and more complex than simple affection. For her part, she found herself acutely aware of his presence, of the way his shirt stretched across his broad shoulders when he worked, of the gentle strength in his hands when he showed her how to use a new tool. The attraction between them was growing, but neither seemed willing to acknowledge it directly. They were both too aware of the circumstances that had brought them together, too conscious of the power imbalance that had existed at the beginning of their relationship. Gregory, in particular, seemed determined to give Martha time and space to discover her own feelings without pressure from him. But Martha was discovering that she did not want space. She wanted closeness, intimacy, the right to touch Gregory the way her heart longed to touch him. She wanted to be more than his partner in the practical matters of mountain life. She wanted to be his partner in every sense of the word. The realization came to her gradually, like the slow lightening of the sky before dawn. She was falling in love with Gregory Edwards, this gentle giant who had saved her from a life of misery and shown her what it meant to be valued and cherished. The love she felt for him was nothing like the desperate gratitude she had experienced in the beginning. It was deeper and richer, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared experiences. But she wasn't sure how to tell him, or even if she should. Gregory had made it clear that she was free to leave whenever she chose, that he expected nothing from her beyond companionship and shared labor. Would he welcome a deeper relationship, or would he see it as a complication he did not need? The question tormented her through the long winter nights, keeping her awake as she listened to Gregory's steady breathing from his place by the fire. She wanted to go to him, to curl up beside him and tell him how she felt, but fear held her back. Fear of rejection, fear of changing something that was already precious to her, fear of losing the safety and security she had found in their friendship. Christmas came and went quietly, marked only by a special meal and the exchange of small, handmade gifts. Gregory gave Martha a beautiful wooden jewelry box he had carved for her, decorated with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. Martha gave him a warm scarf she had knitted from wool she had spun herself, dyed with berries she had gathered the previous autumn. "It's beautiful," Gregory said as he wrapped the scarf around his neck. And Martha felt a flush of pride at the genuine appreciation in his voice. "I wanted to make you something useful," she said. "Something that would keep you warm when you're outside." "It will," he assured her. "And every time I wear it, I'll think of you." The words sent a thrill through Martha that she tried to hide, but she suspected Gregory saw it anyway. He had become very good at reading her expressions, at understanding her moods and needs without her having to voice them. As winter deepened and the snow piled higher around the cabin, Martha found herself growing bolder in small ways. She began sitting closer to Gregory in the evenings, close enough that their shoulders sometimes touched. She lingered near him when they worked together, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke that always clung to his clothes. She caught herself staring at his hands as he worked, fascinated by their strength and gentleness. Gregory, for his part, seemed to be fighting his own battle with restraint. Martha noticed the way his eyes followed her movements, the way his breathing changed when she stood close to him, the way his hands trembled slightly when they accidentally brushed against hers. The tension between them grew like a living thing, filling the small cabin with an electricity that made the very air seem to hum. They were both adults, both free to choose their own path, but the circumstances of their meeting had created a complicated dynamic that neither seemed sure how to navigate. It was Martha who finally broke the stalemate, driven by a combination of love and desperation that overcame her natural caution. They had been snowed in for 3 days straight by a particularly fierce blizzard, and the enforced closeness had pushed her feelings to a breaking point. The storm finally broke on a Tuesday morning, revealing a world transformed by snow and ice. Martha stood at the cabin window, watching the sun glitter on the pristine whiteness, when she felt Gregory come up behind her. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that if she leaned back just slightly, she would be touching him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice low and rough in the morning quiet. "Yes," Martha whispered, but she was not looking at the snow-covered landscape. She was looking at Gregory's reflection in the window, at the way the morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, at the gentle expression in his eyes as he watched her. "Martha," he said, and something in his tone made her turn to face him. They stood there for a moment and looking at each other in the golden morning light, and Martha felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice. One step forward and everything would change. One step back and they would return to the careful dance they had been performing for months. She chose to step forward. "Gregory," she said, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers, "I need to tell you something." He caught her hand in his, pressing it against his cheek, and she felt him tremble at the contact. "What is it?" he asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew. "I love you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know you saved me from my father. I know you gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go, and I know I should be grateful for that and not ask for more. But I can't help it. I love you, Gregory, not just as a friend or a partner, but as a woman loves a man." Gregory closed his eyes, and for a moment Martha thought he was going to pull away, going to gently but firmly reject her declaration. But then he opened them again, and what she saw there made her heart soar. "Martha," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I've been fighting these feelings for months, telling myself it wouldn't be fair to you, that you needed time to discover who you were without the shadow of what your father did to you. But the truth is, I love you too. I love you so much it frightens me." The confession broke something open in Martha's chest, releasing a flood of joy and relief and desire that left her breathless. She rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring all of her feelings into the contact. And Gregory responded with a passion that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gregory rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Are you sure this is what you want? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Martha said without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Gregory searched her eyes for a long moment, as if looking for any sign of doubt or uncertainty. Finding none, he smiled and kissed her again, this time with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Then, "We'll take this slowly," he said. "We'll do this right." And they did. Over the following weeks, As winter gradually loosened its grip on the mountains, Gregory courted Martha with a gentleness and respect that made her fall in love with him all over again. He brought her wildflowers when the first brave blooms pushed through the snow, carved her little tokens of affection, and spent hours simply talking with her about their hopes and dreams for the future. Their physical relationship developed at the same careful pace, with Gregory always letting Martha set the boundaries, always making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together completely, it was with a passion and tenderness that exceeded Martha's wildest dreams. Spring arrived early that year, filling the mountain meadows with wildflowers and bringing new life to the world around their cabin. Martha had never been happier, never felt more complete than she did working beside Gregory in their garden, planning improvements to their home, dreaming of the future they would build together. It was during one of these perfect spring days that their peace was shattered by the arrival of unexpected visitors. Martha was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Gregory emerged from the stable where he had been tending to their animals, his expression immediately alert and wary. Three men rode into the clearing, and Martha's blood ran cold when she recognized the leader. It was Raymond Nelson, a cruel and violent man who had often visited her father's cabin, always looking at Martha with eyes that made her skin crawl. With him were two other men she did not recognize, but their hard faces and the way they wore their guns suggested they were cut from the same cloth as Raymond. "Well, well," Raymond said, dismounting from his horse with a predatory smile. "Look what we have here. Little Martha Walker, all grown up and playing house with the mountain man." Gregory moved to stand between Martha and the three men, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. "You're not welcome here, Nelson," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I suggest you turn around and ride back the way you came." Raymond laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Oh, I don't think so, Edwards. You see, I've come to collect what's mine." "Nothing here belongs to you," Gregory replied. "That's where you're wrong." Raymond's smile turned vicious. "That girl there, she belongs to me. Bought and paid for." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Your dear old daddy, he owed me money, a lot of money, gambling debts, you see. And when he couldn't pay, well, we worked out an arrangement. He signed over his rights to you as payment." "That's impossible," Martha whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it was not. Her father had been capable of any cruelty, any betrayal, if it served his purposes. Raymond pulled a folded paper from his pocket and waved it in the air. "Got the contract right here, all legal and proper. William Torres signed over custody of his daughter Martha Walker to me in payment of debts totaling $200. Gregory's hand tightened on his gun. "Even if that paper is real, it doesn't matter. You can't own a person." "Maybe not in the fancy cities back east," Raymond sneered. "But out here, things are different. Out here, a man's word and his signature means something. And this girl's daddy gave her to me." Martha felt the world spinning around her. Just when she had found happiness, just when she had discovered what it meant to be loved and valued, her father's final cruelty was reaching out to destroy it all. "I won't go with you," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't." Raymond's expression darkened. "You don't have a choice, girl. You belong to me now, and I intend to collect what's mine." "Over my dead body," Gregory said quietly, and something in his tone made all three men tense. "That can be arranged," Raymond replied, his hand moving to his own gun. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, four armed men facing each other in the peaceful mountain clearing, while Martha stood frozen between them. She could see the calculation in Raymond's eyes, the way he was weighing his chances against Gregory's reputation as a marksman. "Tell you what, Edwards," Raymond said finally, "I'm a reasonable man. You paid William 10 pounds of grain for the girl, right? I'll give you the same. 10 pounds of grain, and we'll call it even." "She's not for sale," Gregory replied. "Everything's for sale for the right price. How about 20 pounds? That's double what you paid." "No." "50 pounds? "No." Raymond's facade of reasonableness began to crack. 100 pounds of grain, Edwards. That's more than most men see in a year. Take it and walk away." Gregory's response was to draw his pistol in one smooth motion, the barrel aimed directly at Raymond's chest. I said no. Now get off my land. The three men exchanged glances, clearly not having expected such firm resistance. Raymond's two companions looked nervous, shifting in their saddles as they reassessed the situation. Gregory Edwards might live alone in the mountains, but his reputation with a gun was well known throughout the territory. You're making a mistake, Edwards, Raymond said, but his bravado was beginning to sound forced. I've got legal papers. The law's on my side. What law? Gregory asked. The nearest sheriff is 2 days' ride from here, and he's got no jurisdiction in these mountains anyway. Out here, the only law is what a man can enforce with his own two hands. Martha watched the confrontation with a mixture of terror and pride. Gregory was risking his life for her, standing against three armed men to protect her freedom. The knowledge filled her with a fierce love that burned away her fear. Besides, Gregory continued, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, I've seen your legal papers before, Nelson. You're not the first man to try to claim ownership of another human being with forged documents. Raymond's face flushed red with anger. Those papers are legal. Are they? Because from where I'm standing, they look like the same shoddy forgeries you used to try to steal the Henderson place last year. Same handwriting, same cheap paper, same telltale ink stains. Martha saw doubt flicker across the faces of Raymond's companions. If Gregory was right, if the papers were forgeries, then they were risking their lives for nothing more than Raymond's personal vendetta. Even if the papers were real, Gregory pressed on, which they're not, they'd be worthless. Martha Walker ceased to exist the day she came to live with me. The woman standing behind me is Martha Edwards, my wife, and I'll kill any man who tries to take her from me. The declaration hit Martha like a thunderbolt. Wife? They had never discussed marriage, never made any formal commitment beyond their mutual declarations of love. But as she looked at Gregory's determined profile, she realized that in every way that mattered, they were already married. They had chosen each other, committed to each other, built a life together. The lack of a ceremony or legal document was merely a technicality. You're lying, Raymond snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Gregory asked. Martha, tell these men who you are. Martha stepped forward, moving to stand beside Gregory rather than behind him. She felt his surprise at her boldness, but she was done hiding, done being afraid. I am Martha Edwards, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. Gregory Edwards is my husband, and this is our home. You have no claim on me, Raymond Nelson. You never did. Raymond's face contorted with rage. You think you can just declare yourself married and that makes it so? In the eyes of law and in our own house, yes, Martha replied, and that's the only authority that matters to us. Well, it doesn't matter to me, Raymond roared, his hand moving toward his gun. I came here for what's mine, and I'm not leaving empty-handed. What happened next occurred so quickly that Martha barely had time to register the sequence of events. Raymond's gun cleared its holster, but Gregory was faster, his pistol barking once in the mountain stillness. Raymond spun and fell, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Gregory's gun swung to cover the other two men before they could react. Anyone else want to press their claim? He asked conversationally. The two men looked at their wounded leader, then at Gregory's steady gun hand, and clearly decided that discretion was the better part of valor. This ain't over, Edwards, one of them said, as they helped Raymond back onto his horse. Yes, it is, Gregory replied. And if I see any of you on my land again, I won't aim for the shoulder next time. The three men rode away, Raymond slumped in his saddle and cursing with every breath. Martha and Gregory watched until they disappeared into the trees. Then Gregory holstered his gun and turned to face her. Are you all right? He asked, his hands gentle as they framed her face. I am now, Martha replied, then smiled. Mrs. Edwards. Gregory's answering smile was radiant. I'm sorry I declared us married without asking you first. I know we haven't discussed it, but in the heat of the moment, don't apologize, Martha interrupted. You were right. In every way that matters, we are already married. We've chosen each other, committed to each other, built a life together. What more do we need? A proper ceremony, if you want one, a ring, a celebration. Martha considered this, then shook her head. I don't need those things. I need you, and I have you. That's enough. Gregory pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Martha Edwards, he said. I love you too, Gregory Edwards. My husband. The words felt right on her tongue, natural and true. She was no longer Martha Walker, the unwanted daughter traded for a sack of grain. She was Martha Edwards, beloved wife of a good man, partner in a life built on mutual respect and genuine affection. That evening, as they sat by the fire sharing a quiet meal, Martha found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had been a broken, frightened girl with no hope for the future. Now she was a confident woman, secure in her worth and her place in the world. What are you thinking about? Gregory asked, noticing her contemplative mood. How different my life is now, how different I am. You were always strong, Martha. You just needed someone to see it and help you believe it. Martha shook her head. It's more than that. You didn't just save me from my father, Gregory. You saved me from myself, from the person I was becoming under his cruelty. Gregory reached across the table and took her hand in his. We saved each other. I was dying inside when you came to me, Martha. Dying of loneliness and grief and guilt. You brought me back to life. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped across the table, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Martha spoke again. Do you think Raymond will come back? Not him. That shoulder wound will take weeks to heal, and he's not the type to risk his life for principle. But he might send others. Men like him don't like to lose face. Martha felt a chill of fear, but it was quickly replaced by determination. Then we'll be ready for them. Gregory squeezed her hand. We will. Together. The word carried all the weight of a vow, a promise that they would face whatever came as partners, as equals, as two people who had chosen to bind their lives together in love and commitment. Over the following weeks, Gregory taught Martha more advanced skills with firearms and showed her how to fortify their cabin against potential attacks. They dug hidden caches of supplies throughout their property and established escape routes through the mountains in case they were ever overwhelmed by superior numbers. But the expected retaliation never came. Perhaps Raymond had decided that Martha was not worth the risk. Or perhaps his shoulder wound had been more serious than it initially appeared. Whatever the reason, they were left in peace to continue building their life together. Summer arrived in all its glory, painting the mountain meadows with wildflowers and filling the air with the sweet scent of pine and growing things. Martha had never been happier, never felt more complete than she did working beside Gregory in their expanded garden, tending their small herd of goats and making plans for the future. They talked often of the children they hoped to have, of the improvements they wanted to make to their homestead, of the life they were building together in their mountain sanctuary. Gregory proved to be not just a loving husband, but a true partner in every sense of the word, sharing both the work and the decisions that shaped their daily existence. It was during one of their evening conversations that Gregory made a suggestion that surprised Martha. I've been thinking, he said as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the western peaks. Maybe it's time we made a trip to town. Martha looked at him in surprise. In all the months she had known him, Gregory had shown no interest in venturing beyond their mountain home. Several reasons. We need supplies that I can't make or grow here. And I think it's important that people see us together, see that you're my wife and under my protection. It might discourage others from trying what Raymond attempted. Martha considered this. The thought of returning to civilization, of facing the stares and whispers of townspeople who might remember her as William Torres's unwanted daughter, filled her with anxiety. But she also recognized the wisdom in Gregory's reasoning. When would we go? She asked. Next week, perhaps. The weather's good, and we could make the trip in 2 days if we push hard. All right, Martha agreed, though her stomach fluttered with nerves. If you think it's best. Gregory reached over and took her hand. We don't have to go if you're not ready. There's no rush. No, you're right. It's time. I can't hide in these mountains forever, much as I might like to. You're not hiding, Martha. You're living. There's a difference. But Martha knew that part of her had been hiding, avoiding the world beyond their mountain sanctuary because she was afraid of what she might find there. It was time to face that fear, to step back into the world, the woman she had become, rather than the girl she had been. The trip to town took 2 days, just as Gregory had predicted. They rode side by side down the winding mountain trails, Martha mounted on a gentle mare that Gregory had acquired for her use. She had become an accomplished rider under his tutelage, and she felt confident and secure in the saddle. As they descended toward the valley where the town of Cedar Falls nestled beside a rushing river, Martha felt her anxiety increase. This was the first time she had been around other people since the day her father had traded her away, and she was not sure how she would be received. "Remember," Gregory said as they approached the outskirts of town, "you're not the same person who left here. You're Martha Edwards now, my wife and my equal partner. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Martha nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her. She sat straighter in her saddle and lifted her chin, determined to face whatever awaited them with dignity and courage. The town was busier than Martha remembered, with new buildings and more people than she had expected. They rode down the main street toward the general store, drawing curious stares from the townspeople they passed. Martha heard whispers following in their wake, but she kept her eyes forward and her expression calm. At the general store, they dismounted and tied their horses to the hitching post. Gregory offered Martha his arm, and together they walked through the front door or into the dim interior of the shop. The conversation that had been buzzing among the other customers died abruptly when they entered. Martha felt the weight of a dozen stares, some curious, some hostile, all intensely interested in her presence. "Well, I'll be damned," said a voice from the back of the store, "if it isn't the mountain man himself, and he's brought a woman with him." Martha recognized the speaker as Samuel Reed, one of her father's former drinking companions. He approached them with a leering smile that made her skin crawl. "This wouldn't be little Martha Walker, would it?" Samuel continued, his eyes raking over her in a way that made Gregory tense beside her. "This is my wife, Martha Edwards," Gregory said, his voice carrying a warning that Samuel was too drunk or too stupid to heed. "Wife?" Samuel laughed. "Since when do mountain hermits take wives? And since when do bought women get to call themselves wives?" The insult hit Martha like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Gregory stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun butt. "I'd be very careful about what you say next, Reed," he said quietly. "My wife deserves your respect, and I'll see that she gets it." Samuel's bravado faltered slightly in the face of Gregory's obvious menace, but he was too far gone in drink to back down completely. "Respect," he sneered, "for a girl who was traded away like a sack of grain? Everyone knows what she is, Edwards. Everyone knows what you bought her for." The words hung in the air like poison, and Martha felt her hard-won confidence begin to crumble. This was what she had feared, what she had known she would face if she returned to the world beyond their mountain sanctuary. The shame of her origins, the assumption that she was nothing more than a purchased woman, a commodity to be bought and sold. But then Gregory's hand closed over hers, warm and strong and reassuring, and she remembered who she was now. She was not the broken girl who had been traded away. She was Martha Edwards, beloved wife of a good man, a woman who had found her strength and her worth. "You're right, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent store. "Everyone does know what I am. I am a woman who was rescued from a life of misery by a man who saw my worth when no one else did. I am a woman who has found love and respect in a place where I belong. I am a woman who has learned to value herself because someone else valued me first." She paused, looking around the store at the faces watching. Some hostile, some merely curious, a few showing what might have been admiration. "My father traded me for a sack of grain because that's all he thought I was worth," she continued. "But my husband saw something different. He saw a person worthy of love and respect and partnership. And under his care, I've become everything he saw in me and more." Samuel's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Pretty words, but they don't change what you are." "No, they don't," Martha agreed. "They reveal what I am, what I've always been, even when I didn't know it myself." She turned to address the other customers in the store, her voice growing stronger with each word. Some of you knew me when I was William Torres' daughter. You saw how he treated me, how little he valued me. You might have pitied me, but none of you thought to help. And that's all right, I don't blame you for that. But don't stand here now and judge me for finding my own way to salvation. An uncomfortable silence fell over the store. Martha could see shame on some faces, defiance on others, but she no longer cared what they thought. She had said what needed to be said, claimed her worth in front of those who had known her at her lowest point. Gregory squeezed her hand, his pride in her evident in his expression. Well said, my dear. Now shall we conduct our business and return home? The store owner, who had been watching the confrontation with obvious discomfort, hurried forward to serve them. They completed their purchases quickly and efficiently, the other customers giving them a wide berth. As they prepared to leave, Martha heard whispered conversations starting up behind them. But she no longer cared what was being said. Outside, as they loaded their supplies onto the pack horse they had brought for that purpose, Gregory turned to her with an expression of profound admiration. I have never been more proud of anyone in my life, he said. The way you stood up to them, the way you claimed your worth, it was magnificent. Martha felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I couldn't have done it without you. Without knowing that you believe in me, that you see my worth even when I can't see it myself. You did it all on your own in there. I was just a witness to your strength. As they rode out of town, Martha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had faced her past and emerged victorious, not by denying what had happened to her, but by refusing to let it define her worth. She was Martha Edwards, and that was all that mattered. The journey back to their mountain home passed quickly, both of them eager to return to their sanctuary. As they crested the final ridge and saw their cabin nestled in its clearing below, Martha felt a profound sense of homecoming. There it is, Gregory said softly. Home. Home, Martha agreed, and the word had never sounded sweeter. That evening, as they sat by their fire sharing a quiet meal, Martha found herself reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation in the store had been difficult, but it had also been liberating. She had faced her past and emerged stronger, more confident in her identity as Martha Edwards. Do you regret going to town? Gregory asked, noticing her contemplative mood. No, Martha said without hesitation. It was hard, but it was necessary. I needed to face those people, to show them and myself that I'm not the same person I was. You've grown so much since you came here, Gregory observed. Sometimes I can hardly believe you're the same frightened girl I brought home almost a year ago. I'm not the same person, Martha agreed. That girl died the day you showed her kindness, the day you treated her like she mattered. Gregory reached across the table and took her hand. You always mattered, Martha. You just needed someone to help you see it. And now I do see it. I see my worth, my strength, my value as a person. I see all the things you saw in me from the beginning. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped across the table, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Martha spoke again. I want to have children with you, Gregory. I want to give them the love and security I never had. I want to show them what a real family looks like. Gregory's eyes filled with tears. I want that too, more than anything. Then let's make it happen. Let's build the family we both deserve. Gregory rose from his chair and came around the table to her, pulling her into his arms. I love you, Martha Edwards. More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too, she whispered against his chest. My husband, my partner, my salvation. As autumn approached, bringing with it the promise of another long, cozy winter together, Martha found herself filled with a contentment she had never imagined possible. She had a home, a husband who cherished her, and the prospect of children to love and nurture. She had gone from being worth a sack of grain to being priceless in the eyes of the man who mattered most. The transformation had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of wondering if she truly deserved the happiness she had found. But Gregory had been patient with her insecurities, gentle with her fears, and unwavering in his belief in her worth. One crisp October morning, as they worked together harvesting the last of their garden, Martha paused in her work to watch Gregory. He was kneeling between the rows of vegetables, his hands gentle as he gathered the final tomatoes, his face peaceful in the morning sunlight. This man, this wonderful, patient, loving man had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her scrutiny. "Yeah," she said simply, "how lucky I am to have found you." "We found each other," he corrected, "and I'm the lucky one. You brought light back into my life when I thought I was destined to live in darkness forever." Martha set down her basket and went to him, kneeling beside him in the rich earth of their garden. "We saved each other," she said, echoing words he had spoken to her months earlier. "Yes," he agreed, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "We did." As winter settled over their mountain sanctuary once again, Martha found herself thinking often about the journey that had brought her to this place of happiness and security. She had been traded away like a commodity, treated as if she had no value, no worth as a human being. But Gregory had seen something different. He had seen a person deserving of love and respect, and under his care she had blossomed into everything he had believed she could be. The sack of grain her father had received for her had long since been consumed, turned into bread and porridge and forgotten. But Martha Edwards would be treasured forever, valued not for what she could provide, but for who she was. She was priceless, and she finally knew it. One snowy evening in December, as they sat by their fire reading together, Gregory suddenly closed his book and looked at her with an expression of such tenderness that it took her breath away. "What is it?" she asked. "I was just thinking about that day when I first brought you here. You were so frightened, so broken, I wasn't sure I could help you heal. But you did help me heal. You showed me what I was worth." "No, Martha. You showed me what you were worth. I just provided the safe space for you to discover it yourself." Martha considered this, recognizing the truth in his words. Gregory had not created her strength. He had simply given her the security and love she needed to find it within herself. "We make a good team," she said finally. "The best," he agreed, reaching over to take her hand. "Partners in everything." "Partners in everything," she echoed, and the words carried all the weight of a sacred vow. As the fire crackled in the hearth and the wind howled outside their cozy cabin, Martha reflected on the miracle of her transformation. She had gone from being a commodity, something to be traded away for grain, to being a treasured partner in a loving marriage. She had discovered her worth, her strength, her voice. She had learned to stand up for herself, to demand the respect she deserved, to see herself through the eyes of someone who loved her. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment of struggle and doubt. She was Martha Edwards now, beloved wife of a good man, valued member of a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. She was priceless, and she would never let anyone convince her otherwise again. Spring returned to the mountains with a burst of life and color that seemed to mirror Martha's own blossoming happiness. As she worked in their expanded garden, planting seeds for the coming season, she found herself humming with contentment. The woman who had once been traded for a sack of grain was now the cherished partner of a man who would have given anything to protect her. It was during this season of renewal that Martha discovered she was carrying Gregory's child. The realization came to her gradually through small signs that accumulated into certainty. When she finally shared the news with Gregory, his joy was so profound it brought tears to both their eyes. "A child," he whispered, his large hands gentle as they rested on her still flat stomach. "Our child." "Are you happy?" Martha asked, though his expression left no doubt about his feelings. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "You've given me everything, Martha. Love, partnership, purpose, and now this. How did I get so fortunate?" "We both got fortunate," she corrected, echoing the sentiment that had become their shared philosophy. "We found each other when we both needed saving." As Martha's pregnancy progressed, Gregory became even more protective and attentive than usual. He took over the heavier chores without being asked, made sure she had the best food and plenty of rest, and spent long evenings reading to her from books about child rearing and family life. "You're going to be a wonderful father," Martha told him one evening as they sat together planning the nursery they would create in the cabin's loft. "I hope so. I want to give our child everything I never had, everything you never had. Love, security, the knowledge that they're valued and cherished. They'll have all of that and more, Martha assured him. They'll have parents who chose each other, who built a life together based on mutual respect and genuine love. That's more than most children ever get. The pregnancy proceeded smoothly, with Martha maintaining her health and strength throughout. Gregory proved to be an attentive and caring expectant father, anticipating her needs and ensuring her comfort in every possible way. As her due date approached, he made preparations to assist with the birth, having acquired medical knowledge during his years of solitary living when he'd had to tend to his own injuries and illnesses. Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced her presence to the world. Martha held the tiny, perfect child in her arms and felt a love so fierce and protective, it took her breath away. "She's beautiful," Gregory whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at his daughter. "Perfect. What shall we name her?" Martha asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never settled on a final choice. Now, looking down at their daughter's tiny face, the answer came to Martha with sudden clarity. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Gregory nodded, understanding immediately why Martha had chosen that name. Hope represented everything their daughter symbolized: the future they were building together, the love that had grown between them, the promise of better things to come. "Hope Edwards," he said, testing the name. "It's perfect." As Martha recovered from the birth and they settled into the rhythms of life with a newborn, she found herself marveling at how complete their family felt. The cabin that had once housed a lonely, grieving man now rang with the sounds of family life: Hope's cries and gurgles, the soft conversations between husband and wife, the gentle lullabies Martha sang as she nursed their daughter. Gregory proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn with nighttime feedings and diaper changes, walking the floor with Hope when she was fussy, and spending hours simply watching her sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never thought I'd have this again," he confided to Martha one evening as they sat together watching Hope sleep in her cradle. "After I lost my first family, I thought that part of my life was over forever." "But it wasn't over," Martha said softly. "It was just waiting for the right time, the right people to begin again." "You gave me back my faith in the future," Gregory told her. "You and Hope both." As their daughter grew from infant to toddler, the cabin filled with new sounds: her first words, her delighted laughter, the patter of small feet across the wooden floors. Hope was a happy, confident child, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and wanted by both her parents. Martha often found herself comparing Hope's childhood to her own, marveling at the difference love and security could make. Where Martha had learned to make herself small and invisible, Hope was encouraged to explore and question and express herself. Where Martha had been told she was worthless, Hope was praised for her intelligence and creativity and spirit. "She's going to be strong," Gregory observed one day as they watched Hope attempt to climb a tree that was clearly too big for her. "Independent and fearless." "Like her father," Martha replied with a smile. "Like her mother," Gregory corrected. "She has your determination, your refusal to give up even when things seem impossible." Martha felt a flush of pride at the comparison. The frightened girl who had once been traded away for grain had indeed become a strong, determined woman, and she was passing those qualities on to her daughter. As Hope grew older, Martha began to tell her carefully edited stories about her own childhood, wanting her daughter to understand that not all children were as fortunate as she was. She spoke of kindness and cruelty, of the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect, of the strength that could be found in love and family. "Your mama was very brave," Gregory would add to these stories. "She survived things that would have broken a weaker person, and she became stronger because of them." Hope listened to these tales with the wide-eyed attention of a child learning about the world, absorbing the lessons about resilience and courage that her parents wanted to impart. When Hope was 3 years old, Martha found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was more difficult, with periods of nausea and fatigue that kept her bedridden for days at a time. Gregory stepped up to care for both his wife and daughter, managing the household with the same competence he brought to everything else. Their son was born during a fierce winter storm, as if announcing his intention to face life's challenges head-on. They named him James after Gregory's father, and he proved to be as strong-willed as his sister, but with a gentler temperament. With two children to raise, the cabin felt wonderfully full of life and love. Martha would sometimes pause in her daily tasks to listen to the sounds of her family. Gregory teaching Hope to read, baby James babbling in his cradle, the crackling of the fire that warmed their home. These were the sounds of the life she had never dared to dream of, the family she had never thought she would have. As the years passed, Martha and Gregory's love only deepened and grew stronger. They faced the challenges of raising two active children with patience and teamwork, supporting each other through sleepless nights and difficult days. Their partnership, which had begun as a rescue mission, had evolved into something beautiful and enduring. Hope grew into a confident, intelligent girl who showed early signs of her mother's strength and her father's practical wisdom. She helped with the garden and the animals, learned to read and write under her parents' tutelage, and absorbed the values of hard work and mutual respect that defined their household. James developed into a sturdy, cheerful boy who seemed to find joy in everything around him. He had his father's gentle nature and his mother's determination, and he worshipped his older sister even as he tried to keep up with her more adventurous exploits. The family's reputation in the surrounding area had evolved over the years, from suspicion to grudging respect to genuine admiration. Gregory's skill as a craftsman and hunter was well known, and Martha's transformation from broken girl to confident woman had become something of a local legend. People spoke of how the mountain man had seen a worth where others saw only damaged goods, and how his faith in her had been rewarded beyond measure. Occasionally, travelers would make the difficult journey to their mountain home, seeking Gregory's expertise in metalworking or Martha's knowledge of herbal medicine. They always found a warm welcome and generous hospitality, for both Gregory and Martha understood what it meant to be in need of kindness. One such visitor arrived on a cold November day when Hope was 7 and James was 4. Martha opened the door to find a young woman standing on their porch, clearly exhausted and near the end of her strength. She was perhaps 18 years old, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who had seen too much hardship for her age. "Please," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard there was a woman here who might help me. I have nowhere else to go." Martha's heart clenched with recognition and sympathy. She saw herself in this girl's desperate eyes, remembered her own arrival at this same door years earlier. "Come in," Martha said immediately, stepping aside to let the girl enter. "You're safe here." The girl's name was Sarah, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. She had been sold by her stepfather to pay his gambling debts, had escaped from the man who bought her, and had been wandering the mountains for days trying to find help. Gregory took one look at the girl and immediately began preparing food and hot tea, while Martha helped her out of her wet clothes and into something warm and dry. They asked no questions, made no demands, simply provided the care and comfort she so desperately needed. "You can stay as long as you need to," Martha told Sarah as they sat by the fire. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you or force you to do anything you don't want to do." Sarah began to cry then, great heaving sobs that spoke of relief and gratitude and the release of fear she had been carrying for too long. Martha held her as she wept, remembering her own tears on that first night in this cabin, understanding exactly what the girl was feeling. Over the following days, Sarah's story emerged in bits and pieces. Like Martha, she had been treated as property rather than a person, valued only for what she could provide rather than who she was. But unlike Martha, she had found the courage to run, to risk everything for the chance at freedom. "You're very brave," Martha told her. "It takes tremendous courage to walk away from the familiar, even when the familiar is terrible." "I don't feel brave," Sarah replied. "I feel scared and lost and worthless." "I know that feeling," Martha said gently. "I felt the same way when I first came here." "But you're not worthless, Sarah. You're a human being with value and dignity, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." Gregory, meanwhile, began making inquiries about Sarah's situation, using his network of contacts throughout the territory to learn more about the man who claimed to own her. What he discovered was not encouraging. The buyer was a wealthy and influential man with connections to corrupt officials who would be unlikely to help a runaway girl. "We'll figure something out," Gregory assured Martha when he shared this information. "We won't let her be dragged back to that life." Martha nodded, her resolve strengthening. She knew what it was like to be trapped in a situation with no hope of escape, and she would not stand by and watch another young woman suffer that fate. The solution came from an unexpected source. One of Gregory's contacts mentioned that the man who claimed to own Sarah had recently died in a hunting accident, leaving no heirs and no one to pursue his property. Sarah was effectively free. When they shared this news with her, Sarah collapsed in relief and gratitude. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "I'm really free?" "You're really free," Martha confirmed. "The question now is, what do you want to do with that freedom?" Sarah looked around the warm, welcoming cabin at the family that had taken her in without question or judgment, and her answer was immediate. "I want to stay here, if you'll have me. I want to learn to be strong like you, Mrs. Edwards. I want to learn what it means to have value." Martha felt tears prick at her eyes. "Of course you can stay, for as long as you want." And so their family grew by one more member. Sarah proved to be a quick learner and a willing worker, helping with the children and the household tasks while gradually healing from the traumas of her past. Under Martha and Gregory's patient guidance, she began to discover her own worth and strength. Hope and James accepted Sarah into their family with the easy grace of children, treating her as an older sister and delighting in having another person to play with and learn from. The cabin, which had once been the lonely retreat of a grieving man, was now filled to bursting with love and laughter and life. As Martha watched Sarah's transformation over the months that followed, she was reminded of her own journey from brokenness to wholeness. It was a privilege to be able to offer another young woman the same gift of safety and acceptance that Gregory had given her all those years ago. "You're changing her life," Gregory observed one evening as they watched Sarah teaching Hope to braid her hair. "We're changing her life," Martha corrected, "just like you changed mine." "We all changed each other's lives," Gregory replied. "That's what families do." Martha smiled at the word family. Their household might not look like a traditional family to outside observers, but it was bound together by something stronger than blood: the choice to love and support each other through whatever life might bring. As winter settled over their mountain sanctuary once again, Martha reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She had been traded away for a sack of grain, treated as if she had no value, no worth as a human being. But she had found a man who saw her true value, who helped her discover her own strength and dignity. Now she was able to pass that gift forward, to help another young woman discover her own worth. The cycle of rescue and healing continued, creating ripples of love and hope that extended far beyond their small mountain home. On a crisp morning in early spring, as Martha stood in her garden planning the season's planting, she found herself thinking about the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. The woman she had become bore little resemblance to the frightened girl who had been traded away for grain all those years ago. She was no longer Martha Walker, the unwanted daughter who had been valued at 10 pounds of grain. She was Martha Edwards, beloved wife, devoted mother, and rescuer of lost souls. She had found her voice, her strength, her place in the world, and she had used those gifts to build something beautiful and lasting. Gregory emerged from the cabin, carrying baby James on his hip, while Hope skipped along beside him. Sarah followed behind, her arms full of the mending she had been working on. The sight of her family together filled Martha with a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Gregory asked as he approached, recognizing the contemplative expression on her face. "Everything," Martha replied. "The journey that brought us all here. How different things might have been if you hadn't seen something worth saving in a broken girl." "I saw what was always there," Gregory said gently. "I just helped you see it too." Martha reached up to touch his face, marveling as always at the gentleness in this strong man who had given her everything that mattered. "You gave me more than just a home and safety," she said. "You gave me myself. You showed me what I was worth." "And what are you worth?" he asked, smiling at the familiar conversation. "Everything," Martha replied without hesitation. "I'm worth everything because I'm loved and I love in return, because I'm part of something bigger than myself, because I matter to the people who matter to me." "That's right," Gregory said, pulling her close. "You're priceless, Martha Edwards. You always were." As they stood together in their garden, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created, Martha felt a profound sense of completion. She had been traded for a sack of grain, but she had been redeemed by love. She had been broken, but she had been made whole. She had been worthless in her father's eyes, but she was priceless in the eyes of those who truly knew her. The sack of grain was long gone, consumed and forgotten. But Martha Edwards would be treasured forever, valued not for what she could provide, but for who she was. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that her worth was not determined by how others treated her, but by how she chose to see herself and how she chose to live her life. In the end, that was the greatest gift Gregory had given her. Not rescue from her circumstances, but the knowledge of her own value. And that knowledge had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone she touched. She was no longer the girl who had been traded for grain. She was the woman who had learned she was worth everything, and who had used that knowledge to build a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. As the sun climbed higher in the mountain sky, casting its golden light over their peaceful valley, Martha smiled and turned her attention to the practical task of planting her garden. There was work to be done, a family to care for, a life to be lived. And she would live it with the full knowledge of her own worth, secure in the love of those who mattered most, grateful for the journey that had brought her home to herself at last. The transformation was complete. The girl who had been worth a sack of grain had become the woman who was priceless, and she would never forget the difference between the two.